They called me the forgotten one, the daughter who never amounted to anything, but that day when the mayor looked at me and said thank you for your decades of service to our city, everything changed. The autumn air was crisp that evening, golden leaves swirling around the marble steps of the community center where I had spent countless quiet hours over the years. My family stood beside me in their finest clothes, confusion written across their faces as they watched the most powerful people in our city approach me with genuine warmth and respect. They had always seen me as the quiet one, the one who faded into the background while my siblings claimed the spotlight with their dramatic successes and failures. But what they didn't know is that while they were busy making noise, I was busy making a difference. The weight of that secret had carried me through decades of family gatherings where I was an afterthought, through holidays where my chair remained empty because no one thought to save me a place, through celebrations where my achievements went unmentioned because no one knew they existed. Tonight, under the soft glow of the streetlights illuminating the building that bore my name in elegant bronze letters, that silence was about to break forever. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. This journey has taught me that quiet strength can move mountains, and I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't measured by how loudly others acknowledge it. Growing up in the Henderson family meant learning your place in the hierarchy early and accepting it without question. My older sister Maria was the star, the one who commanded attention the moment she walked into any room with her infectious laugh and boundless energy. She had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world, at least until someone more interesting came along. My younger brother David was the rebel, the one who kept everyone on their toes with his constant adventures and misadventures, always needing to be rescued from some scheme or another. Then there was me, right in the middle. The one who never caused trouble, never demanded attention, never needed rescuing. I was the reliable one, the one who helped Mom with dinner while Maria entertained the guests, the one who helped Dad with his paperwork while David was off exploring the neighborhood. They called me dependable, which I learned early on was just another word for forgettable. Family dinners were always the same routine. Maria would burst through the door with stories of her latest triumph at work, her voice carrying through the house as she recounted every detail of her day. David would arrive fashionably late with some tale of adventure, whether it was a spontaneous road trip or a new business venture that was definitely going to make him rich this time. They would hold court at the dinner table, passing the conversation back and forth like a tennis ball, while I sat quietly, cutting my food into small pieces and listening to their animated exchanges. When Mom would occasionally turn to me and ask about my day, I would offer a simple fine or nothing much, not because I didn't have anything to share, but because I had learned that my quiet contributions didn't translate well to dinner table entertainment. They weren't looking for stories about the elderly woman I had helped with her groceries or the after-school program I had volunteered at for the third year running. They wanted drama, excitement, something that would make them lean forward in their chairs and ask for more details. The pattern extended beyond our family dinners into every aspect of our lives together. When Maria got engaged, it was a 3-month celebration that consumed every family gathering with discussions of venues, dresses, and guest lists. When David decided to quit his job to pursue his dream of becoming a professional photographer, it sparked passionate debates about following your heart versus financial security that lasted well into the night. When I quietly earned my master's degree in social work while working full-time and volunteering at the community center, it merited a congratulations at the end of a meal, somewhere between passing the salt and clearing the dishes. I had learned not to expect more, not to hope for the kind of attention that came so naturally to my siblings. Instead, I found satisfaction in the work itself, in the quiet moments when I could make a real difference in someone's life without needing an audience to witness it. The holidays were particularly challenging for someone like me who preferred substance over spectacle. Thanksgiving would find Maria regaling everyone with stories of her latest promotion while David shared photos from his recent adventure to some exotic location. Christmas morning meant listening to excited chatter about expensive gifts and vacation plans while I sat in the corner, content with my simple presence and grateful for the rare moments of family togetherness. Easter dinner would bring updates on Maria's latest romantic drama or David's newest creative project, conversations that would stretch for hours while I helped Mom in the kitchen, finding more satisfaction in the quiet work of preparation than in the noisy celebration that followed. They weren't being intentionally cruel, I understood that. They simply operated on a different frequency, one that required volume and excitement and constant motion. I had learned to find my place in the spaces between their stories, in the quiet moments when the conversation died down and someone needed to refill the water glasses or clear the plates. My parents loved me, I never doubted that, but they loved me the way you love a comfortable old sweater that you rarely think about but appreciate when you need it. They knew I would always be there, always be reliable, always be the one who could be counted on to handle the practical matters while everyone else dealt with the more exciting aspects of life. When they needed someone to house sit during their anniversary trip, they called me. When they needed someone to drive Grandma to her doctor's appointments, they called me. When they needed someone to organize Mom's surprise birthday party, they called me, though they somehow forgot to mention my contributions when they were thanking everyone at the actual event. I had become the family's silent infrastructure, the one who kept everything running smoothly while remaining largely invisible to those who benefited from my efforts. The community center became my refuge during those years when I felt most invisible at home. I had started volunteering there during my junior year of college, initially just to fulfill a requirement for one of my social work classes. The building was old and worn, with creaky floors and windows that stuck in the humidity, but it buzzed with life and purpose in a way that felt immediately familiar to me. There were children who needed help with homework, elderly residents who needed assistance with paperwork, young mothers who needed someone to watch their toddlers while they attended GED classes. It was a place where quiet competence was valued over flashy presentations, where showing up consistently mattered more than showing off occasionally. I found myself staying longer than required, taking on additional responsibilities, becoming someone that others could depend on without needing to announce my presence with fanfare or drama. Mrs. Patterson, the center's director, was the first person in years who seemed to really see me. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had been running the center for over 2 decades with a combination of fierce determination and gentle compassion. She noticed when I stayed late to help a struggling student with math homework, when I organized the supply closet without being asked, when I quietly paid for supplies out of my own pocket rather than let a program go without. She would thank me for these small gestures, not with grand pronouncements or public recognition, but with quiet words of appreciation that meant more to me than any spotlight ever could. Under her guidance, I began to understand that there were different ways to make a difference in the world, that not every contribution needed to be announced with trumpets and applause to be valuable. The years passed quietly, each one building on the last as I deepened my involvement with the center and the community it served. I learned the names of the regular visitors, their stories, their struggles, their small victories. I became the person they looked for when they needed help navigating the bureaucracy of social services, when they needed someone to advocate for their children in school meetings, when they needed someone to simply listen without judgment as they worked through their problems. My days developed a rhythm that felt natural and purposeful, even if it was largely invisible to my family. I would wake early to prepare for my job at the social services office, spend my lunch breaks at the center helping with whatever needed attention, and return in the evenings to run programs or simply be available for anyone who needed support. My family's busy lives continued to unfold around me, full of excitement and drama and constant change. Maria's career in marketing took off like a rocket, each promotion bringing new responsibilities and new stories to share at family gatherings. David's photography business eventually found its footing, and his Instagram account gained thousands of followers who loved his adventurous lifestyle and stunning landscape shots. They were both living lives that looked impressive from the outside, full of recognition and achievement, and the kind of success that was easy to measure and celebrate. I was genuinely happy for them, proud of their accomplishments, even if I sometimes felt like I was watching their lives from a great distance. They had found their paths to fulfillment, and I had found mine, even if mine was harder to explain in conversation or capture in social media posts. The phone calls from my family became less frequent as we all settled into our adult lives, but the pattern remained the same when we did connect. They would update me on their latest projects and adventures, ask brief questions about my work that they didn't really wait for me to answer, and then move on to other topics that interested them more. I learned to compress my life into simple responses that wouldn't bog down the conversation, to save my stories for the people who had time to truly listen. The community center had become my second family, full of people who understood that quiet service was its own form of excellence, that showing up consistently was more valuable than showing up dramatically. As the years accumulated, I began to take on more responsibilities at the center without any official title or recognition. I was the one who knew where everything was stored, who remembered which programs needed supplies, who had developed relationships with the local businesses that donated food and clothing. I was the one who stayed late to lock up, who came in early to set up for special events, who could be counted on to handle whatever crisis emerged. Mrs. Patterson began to rely on me more heavily, trusting me with increasingly important decisions about programming and resource allocation. I never asked for credit or recognition, content to see the program succeed and the community thrive, but I was aware that my contributions were becoming essential to the center's operations. The center's annual fundraising gala was always the biggest event of the year, a chance for the community to come together and celebrate another year of service, while raising money for the programs that served our most vulnerable residents. I had helped organize the event for over a decade, working behind the scenes to coordinate catering, decorations, entertainment, and the countless details that made the evening successful. I knew every vendor, every volunteer, every aspect of the complex logistics that went into creating a memorable evening. My family had never attended, despite my annual invitations, always having other commitments or simply not being interested in what they saw as a small, local event. I had stopped expecting them to come, stopped hoping they might see this important part of my life, and instead focused on creating an evening that would honor the work we did and the people we served. This year felt different somehow, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Mrs. Patterson had been acting mysteriously for weeks, having hushed conversations with the board members and making plans that she didn't share with me. She had insisted that I invite my family again, even though I explained that they never came to these kinds of events. She had smiled in that knowing way she had and said that this year might be different, that this year they might want to be there. I had dutifully sent the invitations, expecting the usual polite declines, but to my surprise, they had all responded that they would attend. Maria had even asked about dress code, and David had requested directions to the venue. I was pleased but puzzled, wondering what had changed to make them suddenly interested in my world. The evening of the gala arrived with a kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything feel magical. The leaves were at their peak colors, painting the trees in brilliant shades of gold and crimson that complemented the warm lights strung around the community center's entrance. I had spent the entire day at the venue, overseeing the setup, checking every detail, making sure everything was perfect for the evening's celebration. The catering staff had arrived early to prepare the dinner. The volunteers had decorated the main hall with elegant simplicity, and the silent auction items were displayed in a way that showcased the generosity of our local business community. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot where guests would soon arrive, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that always accompanied these events. My family arrived together, looking slightly out of place in their formal attire as they navigated the familiar entrance to a building they had heard about but never really seen. I watched them take in the decorations, the elegant table settings, the carefully curated displays that told the story of our year's work. They seemed surprised by the scale and sophistication of the event, having perhaps expected something smaller and more casual. I greeted them warmly, grateful that they had finally decided to see this important part of my life, and guided them to their table near the front of the room where they would have a good view of the evening's program. As the guests continued to arrive, I noticed my family's growing surprise at the caliber of people who were attending. The mayor was there along with several city council members, local business leaders, and prominent figures from the nonprofit community. They watched as these important people greeted me by name, thanked me for my work, and spoke about the center's programs with genuine knowledge and enthusiasm. I could see the wheels turning in their minds as they tried to reconcile the image they had of my small, quiet life with the reality of the respect and recognition I had earned in the community. They had never seen me in this context before, had never witnessed the professional relationships I had built or the reputation I had earned through years of consistent service. The evening's program was about to begin, and I excused myself to check on the final preparations backstage. Mrs. Patterson found me there, her eyes bright with excitement and something else I couldn't quite identify. She took my hands in hers and looked at me with the kind of intensity that made me pay attention despite the chaos of activity around us. She told me that tonight was going to be special, that tonight was going to change everything, and that I should be prepared for some surprises. I laughed and told her that I had enough surprises just getting my family to attend, but she shook her head and said that was just the beginning. Before I could ask what she meant, the lights were dimming and it was time for the program to start. I returned to my family's table as the mayor took the stage to welcome everyone and thank them for their support of the community center. He spoke about the importance of the work we did, about the lives that had been changed and the families that had been helped through our programs. He talked about the dedicated staff and volunteers who made it all possible, about the quiet heroes who worked behind the scenes to serve others without seeking recognition for themselves. My family listened politely, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like new interest, as if they were beginning to understand that this evening was more significant than they had initially realized. As the mayor continued his remarks, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. All those years of quiet service, all those hours spent listening to people's problems and helping them find solutions, all those small acts of kindness that had seemed insignificant at the time, but had somehow added up to something meaningful. I had never expected recognition, had never sought the spotlight, had been content to do the work for its own sake. But sitting there with my family beside me, watching them begin to see a side of my life they had never known existed, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the praise being offered from the stage. The mayor's speech was building to something, though I couldn't quite tell what. He was talking about a special announcement, about recognition that was long overdue, about honoring someone who had given their heart and soul to the community for many years. I assumed he was talking about Mrs. Patterson, who certainly deserved every accolade she might receive, and I prepared to join in the applause for her well-earned recognition. But then he said something that made my breath catch in my throat, something about a naming ceremony and a permanent tribute to decades of service. The room began to buzz with anticipation, and I felt my family's attention sharpen as they sensed that something important was about to happen. The mayor gestured toward the back of the room, where a large covered display had been positioned near the entrance. He began to speak about the person they were honoring, about someone who had been the heart and soul of the community center for over 2 decades, someone who had touched countless lives through their quiet dedication and unwavering commitment to service. As he spoke, I felt a growing sense of unreality, as if I were watching the evening unfold from outside my own body. The description he was giving sounded familiar, but it couldn't possibly be about me, could it? I was just a volunteer, just someone who helped out when needed, just the quiet one who worked behind the scenes while others took the spotlight. My family was looking at me now with expressions I had never seen before, a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition that mirrored my own feelings. David reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes wide with something that looked like awe. Maria leaned forward in her chair, her attention completely focused on the stage for the first time all evening. Even my parents, who had spent decades seeing me as their reliable but unremarkable middle child, were staring at me with expressions that suggested they were seeing me clearly for the first time. The mayor was still speaking, but his words seemed to be coming from very far away as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The moment had arrived for the unveiling, and the mayor was asking everyone to direct their attention to the covered display at the back of the room. As the cloth was pulled away, revealing the bronze plaque that would be permanently mounted at the center's entrance, I saw my name etched in elegant letters that caught the light from the chandeliers above. The plaque read, "The Sarah Henderson Community Service Wing, dedicated to a lifetime of quiet excellence and unwavering dedication to serving others. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat as I sat frozen in my chair, trying to process what was happening. My family was staring at the plaque, then at me, then back at the plaque as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. This was their quiet sister, their forgotten daughter, their reliable but unremarkable family member, and yet here was undeniable proof that I had been living a life of significance that they had never imagined. The mayor was gesturing for me to join him on stage, but I felt rooted to my spot, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment and the weight of recognition I had never expected to receive. It was Mrs. Patterson who finally came to my table, took my hand, and gently guided me toward the stage where the entire community was waiting to honor the work I had done in the shadows for so many years. As I walked toward the stage, past tables full of people who were applauding with genuine enthusiasm, I caught glimpses of my family out of the corner of my eye. They were still seated at their table, but they were leaning forward now, their faces reflecting a mixture of pride and bewilderment that I had never seen before. For the first time in decades, I was the center of attention, not because I had demanded it or created drama to get it, but because I had earned it through years of quiet service that had finally been recognized by the people who mattered most. The forgotten daughter was about to be forgotten no more, and as I climbed the steps to the stage where the mayor was waiting with his hand extended, I felt the weight of my family's newfound understanding settling around me like a warm embrace. The mayor was shaking my hand now, his smile genuine and warm as he prepared to tell the assembled crowd about the woman they were honoring tonight. Behind me, I could feel the presence of my family, their attention focused on me with an intensity that felt both thrilling and overwhelming. The bronze plaque with my name gleamed in the spotlight, a permanent testament to a life of service that had been invisible to the people who should have seen it most clearly. As the mayor began to speak about my contributions to the community, I found myself thinking about all the quiet moments that had led to this public recognition, all the small acts of kindness that had somehow added up to something worthy of celebration. The evening was far from over, but already I could sense that something fundamental had changed in the way my family saw me and the way I saw myself. The quiet daughter who had always faded into the background was standing in the spotlight at last, not because she had demanded attention, but because she had earned recognition through a lifetime of serving others. As the mayor continued his speech and the community center prepared to officially dedicate the Sarah Henderson Community Service Wing, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment and the family who was finally ready to see me as I truly was. The building that had been my refuge for so many years was about to bear my name, and my family was about to discover that their forgotten daughter had been making history all along. The mayor's voice carried across the silent room as he began to tell my story, but it wasn't the story my family thought they knew. He spoke of a young woman who had arrived at the community center 23 years ago as a college student, initially fulfilling a class requirement, but quickly becoming something much more significant. He described how I had quietly transformed from a volunteer into the backbone of the organization, how my dedication had grown from a few hours a week to nearly every evening and weekend. As he spoke, I could feel my family's eyes on me, their surprise palpable as they heard details about my life that they had never known existed. Maria's mouth was slightly open, her usual composure completely abandoned as she tried to reconcile this public recognition with the sister she thought she knew. The mayor continued, his voice warm with genuine appreciation as he recounted the early days when Mrs. Patterson had first noticed my potential. He told the crowd about how I had started by helping children with homework, but had gradually expanded my role to include everything from grant writing to program development. He spoke about the literacy program I had created for adults who couldn't read, the job training workshops I had organized for unemployed residents, the support groups I had facilitated for families struggling with addiction. Each program he mentioned was something I had developed quietly, without fanfare, working evenings and weekends to ensure that people in our community had the resources they needed to build better lives for themselves and their families. My mind drifted back to those early years when everything had felt like an adventure waiting to unfold. I remembered Mrs. Patterson pulling me aside after my first month of volunteering, her eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that suggested she saw something in me that I hadn't yet recognized in myself. She had asked if I might be interested in taking on a small project, nothing too demanding, just helping to organize the center's library of resource materials. What she hadn't mentioned was that the library was in complete chaos, with years of accumulated papers, pamphlets, and books stuffed into cardboard boxes without any system or organization. I had spent weeks sorting through everything, creating categories, developing a filing system, and setting up a simple database that would help staff members find the information they needed quickly. That first project had led to another, and then another, each one slightly more complex and requiring more of my time and energy. I found myself staying later each evening, arriving earlier on weekends, becoming increasingly invested in the center's mission and the people it served. The work felt natural to me in a way that nothing else ever had, combining my academic training in social work with my natural tendency toward organization and my genuine desire to help others. I discovered that I had a talent for seeing connections between resources and needs, for identifying gaps in services and developing creative solutions to fill them. Most importantly, I learned that I genuinely enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of making things work better, even if no one ever noticed the improvements I was making. The mayor was now describing the food bank I had established during my third year of volunteering, a project that had started with my observation that many of the families who used our services were struggling to put adequate meals on their tables. I had approached local grocery stores about donating food that was approaching its expiration date, organized a network of volunteers to collect and sort donations, and created a system for distributing groceries with dignity and respect. The food bank had started small, serving perhaps a dozen families each week, but it had grown steadily over the years to become one of the most important services the center provided. Hundreds of families now relied on it for basic nutrition, and it had become a model that other community centers throughout the region had adopted. I could see David shaking his head slowly, his photographer's eye perhaps imagining all the stories he had missed while I was quietly building this network of service. He was the one who documented adventures and captured dramatic moments in stunning images, but he had completely missed the quiet drama unfolding in his own family. All those times he had complained about family dinners being boring, all those occasions when he had rushed off to pursue some exciting new project, he had been sitting across the table from someone who was changing lives every single day. The irony wasn't lost on me that the brother who made his living capturing meaningful moments had somehow failed to see the meaning in his own sister's life. The mayor moved on to describe the youth mentorship program I had developed in partnership with the local high school, recognizing that many students were struggling not just academically, but with the basic life skills they would need to succeed as adults. I had recruited volunteers from the professional community to serve as mentors, developed curriculum covering everything from financial literacy to job interview skills, and created a support network that followed students through graduation and into their early careers. The program had been running for over 15 years now, and I had watched hundreds of young people transform from struggling students into confident adults who were contributing positively to their communities. The memories flooded back as I stood on the stage, remembering specific faces and success stories that had made all the long hours worthwhile. There was Marcus, who had arrived at the center as an angry 15-year-old, convinced that the world was against him, but who had gradually opened up through our mentorship program and eventually became the first person in his family to graduate from college. He was now a social worker himself, giving back to the same community that had helped him find his path. There was Elena, a young mother who had been struggling to finish her GED while working 2 jobs and raising 3 children, who had found the support and encouragement she needed through our adult education program and had gone on to become a registered nurse. These were the stories that had sustained me through the years when my own family barely acknowledged my existence, the quiet victories that had convinced me that meaningful work didn't require public recognition to be valuable. My parents were looking increasingly stunned as the mayor continued his recitation of my accomplishments, their faces reflecting a growing realization that they had been living with a stranger for decades. They had thought they knew their middle daughter, the quiet one who never caused trouble, but never achieved anything remarkable either. They had seen my reliability as a lack of ambition, my preference for service over self-promotion as a sign that I wasn't destined for greatness. Now they were learning that while they had been focused on Maria's corporate successes and David's artistic pursuits, I had been quietly building something that would outlast both of their achievements. The community center programs I had developed would continue serving people long after the last promotion had been forgotten and the final photograph had been filed away. The mayor was describing the senior services program now, one of my most personally meaningful projects, because it had grown out of my relationship with my own grandmother before she passed away. I had noticed that many elderly residents were struggling with isolation and the practical challenges of aging, from navigating healthcare systems to maintaining their independence in their own homes. I had developed a comprehensive program that included everything from transportation services to social activities, from assistance with paperwork to regular wellness checks. The program had started with a handful of volunteers and now employed a small staff, serving over 200 senior citizens throughout our community and surrounding areas. I remembered the day Mrs. Patterson had first suggested that I might want to consider making my role at the center more official, perhaps taking on some administrative responsibilities that would come with a modest salary and real decision-making authority. I had been volunteering for nearly 8 years at that point, essentially working a second full-time job without compensation because the work itself was reward enough. She had pointed out that my contributions had become essential to the center's operations, that I was already making most of the day-to-day decisions about programming and resource allocation, and that it was time to acknowledge formally what everyone already knew informally. The transition from volunteer to staff member had been seamless because I was already doing the work, but it had marked an important milestone in my growing influence and responsibility. The mayor was now talking about my role in securing major grants for the center, describing how I had developed expertise in grant writing and proposal development that had brought in millions of dollars over the years. He mentioned the federal grants that had funded our job training programs, the state grants that had supported our youth services, the foundation grants that had allowed us to expand our facilities and hire additional staff. Each grant had represented months of research, writing, and relationship building, work that I had done mostly in the evenings and on weekends while maintaining my regular responsibilities at my day job. My family had no idea that their quiet daughter had become one of the most successful grant writers in the region, that major foundations knew my name and trusted my proposals because I had developed a reputation for delivering exactly what I promised. The audience was listening intently now, many of them nodding in recognition as they heard about programs and services they had personally benefited from or witnessed in action. I could see familiar faces throughout the crowd, people whose lives had intersected with mine over the years in ways that had seemed small at the time, but had apparently added up to something significant. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, whose English language classes I had helped establish when she first arrived from Mexico with her young children. There was Mr. Thompson, whose job search I had supported after he lost his position at the factory, helping him develop new skills and eventually find work that paid better than his previous job. These were the people who had made my work meaningful, who had reminded me daily that service to others was its own reward. Maria was wiping tears from her eyes now, her usual composure completely abandoned as she realized how completely she had misunderstood her sister's life. She was the marketing director who prided herself on understanding people and recognizing talent, yet she had lived in the same family for 43 years without seeing the quiet leader who shared her childhood home. All those times she had dominated family conversations with stories of her latest campaign or client victory, all those occasions when she had unconsciously dismissed my contributions as unimportant. She had been overlooking someone who was making a more lasting impact than any advertising campaign ever could. The sister she had seen as unremarkable was being honored by the entire community for achievements that dwarfed her own. The mayor moved on to describe my role in developing partnerships with other organizations throughout the region, explaining how I had helped create a network of service providers that eliminated duplication and ensured that people could access the help they needed regardless of which organization they first contacted. He talked about the regional conferences I had organized, the best practices I had developed and shared with other centers, the leadership role I had taken in advocating for policy changes at the state level. This was perhaps the aspect of my work that my family would find most surprising, because it revealed that their quiet daughter had become a recognized expert in her field, someone whose opinion was sought and valued by professionals throughout the state. I thought about all the times over the years when my family had asked what I did for work, and I had given them simple answers that didn't begin to capture the complexity and scope of my responsibilities. When they asked about my job at the social services office, I told them I helped people with paperwork, which was technically true, but ignored the fact that I was supervising a team of caseworkers and developing policy recommendations for the county. When they asked about my volunteer work at the center, I told them I helped out with programs, which didn't mention that I was designing those programs, securing funding for them, and training staff members to implement them effectively. I had learned to compress my professional life into digestible summaries that wouldn't burden my family with details they didn't seem interested in hearing. The mayor was describing the new facility expansion now, explaining how I had led the capital campaign that had raised the funds necessary to double the center's size and capacity. He talked about the months I had spent meeting with potential donors, writing proposals, and organizing fundraising events, work that had culminated in the successful completion of a $3 million campaign. The expansion had allowed us to serve twice as many people while adding new programs that addressed emerging needs in our community. The building we were sitting in tonight was a testament to vision and persistence, but my family had never known that their sister had been the driving force behind its creation. I could see my father's expression changing as he began to understand the magnitude of what he was hearing, his face reflecting a combination of pride and confusion that mirrored my own feelings. He was a practical man who had always valued hard work and concrete results, but he had somehow missed the fact that his middle daughter had been demonstrating both qualities on a grand scale for over 2 decades. All those times he had worried about my future, wondering if I would ever amount to anything significant. I had been building something that would benefit thousands of people and outlast his own considerable achievements in business. The daughter he had seen as aimless had been working toward a purpose that was clearer and more meaningful than anything he had ever pursued. The mayor was building toward something now, his tone becoming more formal as he prepared to make the evening's major announcement. He spoke about the board of directors' decision to honor someone whose contributions had been essential to everything the center had accomplished, someone whose quiet leadership had made possible every success they were celebrating tonight. He talked about the importance of recognizing service that was often invisible, work that was done without seeking credit or recognition, but that formed the foundation upon which everything else was built. As he spoke, I felt the weight of 23 years of service settling around me like a warm blanket, all those quiet moments of helping others finally adding up to something that even my family could see and understand. The bronze plaque gleamed in the spotlight as the mayor gestured toward it again, but now he was explaining that the naming of the Sarah Henderson Community Service Wing was only part of the evening's recognition. He announced that the board had also voted to name me as the center's first director emeritus, a position that would allow me to continue shaping the organization's future while acknowledging my unique role in its development. The title came with a generous stipend that would allow me to reduce my hours at my regular job and focus more of my energy on the work that had always been my true passion. It was an honor I had never expected and a practical solution that would allow me to serve the community even more effectively in the years ahead. The applause that followed this announcement was even more thunderous than before, but I found myself looking past the crowd toward my family's table, where 4 people I had known my entire life were seeing me clearly for the first time. David was shaking his head in amazement, his photographer's instincts perhaps calculating all the powerful images he had missed over the years. Maria was leaning forward in her chair, her attention completely focused on the stage with an intensity that I recognized but had never seen directed toward me before. My parents were holding hands, their faces reflecting a mixture of emotions that I couldn't quite decipher from this distance. For the first time in decades, I was the center of their attention not because I needed rescuing or assistance, but because I had earned their respect and recognition through my own achievements. The mayor was asking me to say a few words to the crowd, and I felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that always accompanied public speaking. I had given presentations to foundation boards and policy committees, had addressed conferences of social service professionals, had spoken at countless meetings and events over the years. But this felt different because my family was watching, because people who had never truly seen me were finally paying attention, because the work I had done in the shadows was being brought into the light. I approached the microphone with the same quiet confidence that had carried me through decades of service, ready to share my thoughts with the community that had given my life such meaning and purpose. As I began to speak, thanking the community for their support and acknowledging the many people who had made the center's work possible, I caught sight of my family again. They were listening to every word with an attention that felt both foreign and wonderful, their faces reflecting growing understanding of who I really was and what I had been doing with my life. The forgotten daughter was finally being remembered, the quiet sister was finally being heard, and the reliable family member was finally being recognized as someone whose reliability had made possible something truly extraordinary. The evening was far from over, but already I could sense that the relationships that had defined my entire life were about to change in ways that none of us could have anticipated when we had walked through the center's doors just a few hours earlier. I stood at the microphone, looking out at faces that represented 23 years of shared purpose and quiet dedication, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. The words came naturally, flowing from a place of genuine appreciation for the community that had given my life such meaning and direction. I thanked Mrs. Patterson for seeing potential in a young college student who had initially been just fulfilling a class requirement, for nurturing that potential with patience and wisdom over more than 2 decades. I acknowledged the countless volunteers who had worked alongside me, the staff members who had brought their own talents and dedication to our shared mission, and the community members who had trusted us with their stories and allowed us to be part of their journeys toward better lives. As I spoke about the programs we had built together and the lives we had touched, I could see my family hanging on every word with an intensity that felt both thrilling and overwhelming. They were learning not just about my work, but about my philosophy, my values, my deep belief that service to others was the highest calling anyone could pursue. I talked about the privilege of being trusted with people's most vulnerable moments, of being allowed to help families navigate crises and celebrate victories. I spoke about the humility that came from recognizing that every person who walked through our doors had something to teach as well as something to learn, that effective service required listening more than speaking and understanding more than judging. When I finished my remarks and stepped back from the microphone, the standing ovation seemed to go on forever, but I found myself looking past the applauding crowd toward my family's table. Maria was crying openly now, her usual composure completely abandoned as she processed the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. David was staring at me with an expression of wonder that reminded me of the little boy who used to follow me around the house asking endless questions about everything. My parents were both clapping enthusiastically, their faces reflecting a mixture of pride and bewilderment that would probably take days or weeks to fully process. For the first time in my adult life, I had their complete attention, their genuine admiration, their recognition that their quiet daughter had been living a life of extraordinary purpose and impact. The mayor returned to the microphone to formally dedicate the Sarah Henderson Community Service Wing, but the ceremony felt almost anticlimactic after the emotional intensity of the recognition that had preceded it. A small group of board members joined us on stage for the official unveiling of the permanent plaque that would be mounted near the entrance, marking this wing of the building as a testament to decades of service. As the photographers captured the moment and the crowd applauded once more, I felt a surreal sense of disconnection from the proceedings, as if I were watching someone else's life being celebrated and honored. The girl who had grown up feeling invisible was standing in the spotlight. The woman who had spent decades working in the shadows was being illuminated for all to see. After the formal ceremony concluded, the evening shifted into a more social phase as people moved around the room, enjoying dessert and coffee while sharing stories and conversations. This was when the real impact of the evening began to unfold, as community member after community member approached my family to share their personal experiences with the programs I had developed or the assistance I had provided. Mrs. Rodriguez told Maria about the English classes that had allowed her to communicate with her children's teachers and eventually get promoted at work. Mr. Thompson described to David how the job training program had helped him transition from factory work to a career in healthcare that had doubled his income and given him genuine job satisfaction. My family listened to these stories with expressions of growing amazement, beginning to understand that their quiet sister hadn't just been volunteering at a community center, but had been architecting solutions to complex social problems that had transformed hundreds of lives. Each conversation added another layer to their understanding of my work and my impact, painting a picture of sustained leadership and innovation that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my capabilities and achievements. I watched from across the room as strangers became eager storytellers, sharing details about my contributions that my own family was hearing for the first time. The evening's most powerful moment came when a group of young adults approached my parents, introducing themselves as graduates of the youth mentorship program I had developed 15 years earlier. They spoke eloquently about how the program had changed the trajectory of their lives, providing guidance and support during critical teenage years when they might otherwise have made destructive choices. One young woman, now a teacher herself, explained how the financial literacy classes I had organized had taught her to manage money responsibly, allowing her to become the first person in her family to buy a home. A young man, now working as a computer technician, described how the job interview workshops had given him the confidence to pursue opportunities he never would have considered before. Maria found herself in conversation with Dr. Stevens, the hospital's chief of social services, who wanted to thank her for having a sister who had revolutionized the way their institution connected patients with community resources. He explained that the referral system I had developed had streamlined the process for hospital patients who needed ongoing support after discharge, reducing readmission rates and improving health outcomes throughout the region. He described me as one of the most innovative and effective social service professionals he had worked with in 30 years of healthcare, someone whose collaborative approach and deep understanding of community needs had made possible improvements that benefited thousands of patients annually. David found himself talking with the director of the regional nonprofit consortium, who described my role in developing shared resources and coordinated programming that had eliminated duplication and maximized the impact of limited funding. She explained that my leadership had been instrumental in creating a network of organizations that could respond more effectively to community needs, and that the model we had developed was now being replicated in communities throughout the state. She spoke about my reputation as a thoughtful strategist and skilled facilitator, someone who could bring together diverse groups of people and help them find common ground and shared purpose. My father was approached by several local business leaders who wanted to express their appreciation for the workforce development programs I had created in partnership with their companies. They described how these programs had helped them find qualified employees while providing community members with pathways to stable, well-paying careers. One CEO explained that the customer service training program I had developed had become a model for his entire industry, improving both employee satisfaction and customer outcomes in ways that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Another business owner credited the entrepreneurship workshops I had organized with helping him find and train some of his most valuable staff members. As the evening progressed and more stories were shared, I watched my family's expressions continue to evolve from surprise to amazement to something approaching awe. They were learning that their quiet sister had developed a professional reputation that extended far beyond the local community, that experts in social services and nonprofit management knew my name and sought my input on policy and program development. The daughter they had seen as lacking ambition had been building a career that was both meaningful and influential, creating innovations that would outlast most traditional measures of professional success. Mrs. Patterson approached our family group near the end of the evening, her eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a secret well kept and finally revealed. She wanted to make sure they understood that tonight's recognition was long overdue, that I had been deflecting suggestions for public acknowledgement for years, preferring to let the work speak for itself rather than seeking personal recognition. She explained that the board had finally decided to honor me whether I wanted the attention or not, recognizing that my contributions had become so essential to the organization's identity that they needed to be formally acknowledged and preserved for future generations. She told my family about the countless times I had stayed late to help a family in crisis, about the weekends I had spent writing grants or organizing events, about the vacation days I had used to attend conferences or training sessions that would improve our services. She described my uncanny ability to anticipate community needs before they became critical, to develop programs that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms, to build partnerships that leveraged resources and maximized impact. She spoke about my role as an informal mentor to younger staff members and volunteers, sharing knowledge and experience with generosity and patience that had elevated the performance of everyone around me. The conversation that followed was unlike any my family had ever had, marked by a level of honesty and vulnerability that had been absent from our relationships for decades. Maria admitted that she had always seen me as someone who lacked direction and ambition, someone who was content with a small life because I wasn't capable of achieving anything greater. She apologized for all the times she had dominated family conversations with her own achievements while dismissing mine as unimportant, recognizing now that she had been blind to accomplishments that were far more substantial and lasting than anything she had achieved in her corporate career. David spoke about his regret at missing so many opportunities to really see and understand his sister, acknowledging that his focus on documenting dramatic moments and adventurous experiences had caused him to overlook the quiet drama and meaningful adventure that had been unfolding in his own family. He realized that some of the most powerful stories were hidden in plain sight, that significance wasn't always accompanied by fanfare or excitement, that the most important work was often done by people who had no interest in being photographed or celebrated. My parents struggled to find words for their mixture of pride and regret, proud of what I had accomplished, but deeply sorry that they had failed to see it, failed to support it, failed to acknowledge it over all these years. My father admitted that he had worried about my future for decades, concerned that I would never find my purpose or make my mark on the world, completely missing the fact that I had been doing both with quiet determination and extraordinary effectiveness. My mother expressed amazement that she had raised someone capable of such sustained leadership and innovation while somehow remaining completely unaware of the scope and impact of my work. The conversation gradually shifted from apologies and regrets toward questions and genuine curiosity about my life and work. They wanted to understand how I had developed my expertise, what had motivated me to dedicate so much of my time and energy to serving others, how I had managed to build something so significant while maintaining such humility about my achievements. I found myself sharing stories and insights that I had never had the opportunity to discuss with my family before, opening up about the satisfaction I found in solving complex problems and the privilege I felt in being trusted with people's most challenging moments. As the evening wound down and other guests began to leave, my family lingered in the now quiet community center, reluctant to end a conversation that felt like it was just beginning. They wanted to see the building that would now bear my name, to understand the physical space where I had spent so much of my time and energy over the years. I gave them a tour of the facilities, explaining how each program area had been designed and redesigned over the years to better serve our evolving mission. They saw the children's library I had organized, the computer lab I had equipped with donated machines, the meeting rooms where support groups gathered and job training classes were held. In the main hallway, they studied the photographs and displays that documented the center's history and impact, seeing my face appear again and again in images from events and programs spanning more than 2 decades. They read testimonials from program participants and community partners, many of which specifically mentioned my contributions and leadership. They examined grant awards and recognition certificates that bore my name, evidence of professional achievements they had never known existed. The physical evidence of my life's work surrounded them, making undeniable the reality of accomplishments they were still struggling to fully comprehend. The bronze plaque that would soon be permanently mounted near the entrance sat on a table where everyone could examine it closely, the elegant engraving catching the light from the hallway fixtures. My name was etched in letters that would outlast all of us, a permanent reminder that quiet service could be just as significant as louder forms of achievement. Maria ran her fingers over the letters, shaking her head in wonder at the thought that her sister's name would be on this building forever, honoring work that had been invisible to the people who should have seen it most clearly. As we prepared to leave the building that night, Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside one final time to express her gratitude for everything I had contributed over the years and her excitement about what we would accomplish together in the future. She reminded me that tonight's recognition was not an ending but a beginning, an acknowledgement of past achievements and an investment in future possibilities. The Director Emeritus position would allow me to focus more of my energy on the work I loved while ensuring that the programs and partnerships I had developed would continue to grow and evolve under my guidance. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts as we processed the evening's revelations and their implications for our family relationships going forward. My parents rode with me while Maria and David followed in their own cars, but I could see them in my rearview mirror. Their animated conversation suggesting that they were already planning how to incorporate this new understanding of their sister into their future interactions with me. The family dynamics that had been established decades ago were shifting in real time, and none of us quite knew what our relationships would look like once this new reality settled in. Over the following days and weeks, my family's behavior toward me changed in ways both subtle and profound. They began asking different questions about my work, showing genuine interest in the details of my programs and the people I served. They started including me more naturally in family conversations, seeking my opinions and insights with the respect that comes from recognizing someone's expertise and judgment. They began to see my quiet nature not as a lack of personality or ambition, but as the deliberate choice of someone who was secure enough in her own worth that she didn't need constant validation or attention. Maria called me the week after the gala to ask if she could volunteer at the center, explaining that she wanted to understand my work better and contribute her marketing skills to help promote our programs. David requested permission to document some of our activities for a photography project about unsung heroes in the community, eager to capture the stories he had missed for so many years. My parents began attending more center events, becoming familiar faces at fundraisers and community meetings where they could see me in my element and better understand the life I had built outside their awareness. The professional recognition continued to unfold in the weeks following the gala, with invitations to speak at conferences, requests for consultation from other organizations, and opportunities to influence policy at the state level. My family watched with growing amazement as they learned about the broader impact of my work and the respect I had earned from colleagues throughout the region. They began to understand that their quiet daughter had been operating at a level of professional achievement that rivaled or exceeded anything they had accomplished in their own careers, but had done so with such humility and grace that even they had failed to recognize it. The changes in our family relationships brought both joy and a certain sadness, joy at finally being seen and understood by the people who mattered most to me, but sadness at all the years we had lost to misunderstanding and missed connections. I found myself grieving for the conversations we never had, the support I never received, the recognition that could have meant so much if it had come earlier in my journey. But I also felt profound gratitude for the opportunity to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine understanding, knowing that the years ahead would be richer and more meaningful because of what we had learned about each other. The community center continued to thrive under the new arrangements, with my role as Director Emeritus allowing me to focus on long-term strategic planning while working fewer hours at my regular job. The additional time and energy allowed me to pursue new initiatives and partnerships that would expand our impact even further, secure in the knowledge that my family now understood and supported the work that gave my life such purpose and meaning. The programs I had developed continued to serve hundreds of people each year, creating ripple effects of positive change that extended far beyond our immediate community. As I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, I felt a deep sense of peace about the choices I had made and the life I had built. The recognition was gratifying, but it was not what had motivated my work or what would sustain it going forward. The real reward had always been in the work itself, in the privilege of serving others and the satisfaction of building something that would outlast my own involvement. The fact that my family could now see and appreciate what I had accomplished was an unexpected gift, but it was not what defined the value or meaning of my contributions. The bronze plaque was formally installed near the center's entrance a month after the gala, and I stood with my family as it was unveiled for the final time. The Sarah Henderson Community Service Wing was now an official part of the building's identity, a permanent reminder that quiet service could be just as significant as any other form of achievement. My name would be there long after I was gone, inspiring future generations of staff and volunteers to pursue their own paths of meaningful service to others. The forgotten daughter had been remembered at last, not because she had demanded attention, but because she had earned recognition through decades of selfless dedication to making her community a better place for everyone. Looking back on that transformative evening and the changes it brought to my life and family relationships, I am reminded that worth is not always visible to those closest to us. That significance is not always measured in ways that translate easily to dinner table conversation. Sometimes the most important work is done quietly, consistently, without fanfare or recognition, by people who find their reward in the work itself rather than in external validation. My family's surprise at my achievements taught me that we often fail to see the heroes in our own homes, the quiet leaders who change the world one small act of service at a time. If you're listening to my story and recognizing yourself in it, if you're the one who serves without seeking recognition, who contributes without demanding credit, who builds something meaningful in the spaces between other people's drama and excitement, know that your work matters even if it goes unnoticed. Know that quiet strength is still strength, that humble service is still service, that patient dedication is still dedication. The world needs people who are willing to do important work without requiring constant acknowledgement, people who find their satisfaction in the impact they create rather than the attention they receive. The community center where I spent so many years learning to serve others taught me that the most lasting achievements are often the quietest ones, built through consistency and dedication rather than dramatic gestures or grand announcements. The relationships I formed there, the programs I developed there, the lives that were changed there, all grew out of small daily choices to show up, to listen, to help, to care. These choices may not always be visible to family members or friends, but they're seen by the people who matter most, the ones whose lives are touched and transformed by quiet acts of service and compassion.